West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. Netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte.
The Department of Justice wants to speak with Mike Pence as a witness in its January 6th criminal probe. The New York Times breaking this story. According to two people familiar with the request, the DOJ reached out to the former vice president, and he is open to considering the request. Pence declined to comment to the Times. This is a criminal investigation. It's not a congressional investigation like the January 6th committee has been conducting. Pence recently saying this.
Congress has no right to my testimony. We have a separation of powers under the Constitution of the United States, and I believe it would establish a terrible precedent for the Congress to summon a vice president of the United States to speak about deliberations that took place at the White House.
But now Pence is considering an interview with the DOJ. This request coming prior to a special counsel being tapped for the DOJ's probe. Mike Pence as a witness, he would know a lot about the lead up to the insurrection and the events of that day. And this news coming as Trump blasts the United States Supreme Court after it allowed Trump's tax returns to be turned over to Congress. Trump writing, "Why would anybody be surprised that the Supreme Court has ruled against me? They always do. The Supreme Court has lost its honor, prestige, and standing, and has become nothing more than a political body with our country paying the price. Shame on them." Reminder there, 3 of those Supreme Court justices, they were handpicked by Donald Trump. Joining me now is former federal prosecutor Renato Mariotti and Hugo Lowell, a investigations reporter. Is that right? Yeah, Hugo, you'll go with that. Yeah, political investigative reporter for The Guardian. Renato, I'd like to start with you. Pence reportedly considering, and I put that in quotes, speaking to the DOJ, but clearly Pence knows the teeth of a subpoena. So do you think he's going to try to negotiate terms directly with the DOJ, or do you think he'll mother may I with Trump, no pun intended, before he does so?
I don't think so. I think at this point, Katie, there's no love lost between these two gentlemen. I think at this point they're political rivals, and so Pence wants to seem to his base like he's not being cooperative, like he doesn't want to help the Justice Department, but he knows at the end of the day, the case law in the DC makes very clear that executive privilege is not going to be an excuse to escape a grand jury subpoena, and he is going to want to have his attorney next to him. So I think he's going to negotiate voluntary testimony.
I mean, Hugo, what would this mean for Trump if Pence ends up talking to the DOJ? I don't want to be too Machiavellian here, but we know Pence has his eyes on that 2024 Oval Office as well.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think we don't know yet if there's a subpoena. In fact, it's not clear what the arrangement or what the discussions with DOJ and Pence's lawyer is. But certainly that it is true, and we have separately confirmed that Pence is seriously considering talking to DOJ and going before a potential grand jury in D.C. And the implications are really big because Pence is one of the few people who know, in fact, maybe the only person who knows the content of discussion he had with Trump on January 5, the day before the Capitol attack. And you have to remember, this was the point when Trump was desperately trying to get him to accept and try and overturn the election on January 6th. And this was Trump trying to implore him to do something that we now know is, or we knew then, was illegal. And so the content of that discussion is really key. You know what Trump was saying because there were people in the Oval Office when Trump was talking to Pence, but we don't know what Pence said. And Pence's testimony could be really key. It could kind of reveal the insight into what Trump was thinking, his intent on January 6th, and I think that could really forward a DOJ investigation.
I think we've had a preview, though, Hugo, because of the book that Michael Pence has written. I think he's pretty much already spoken to the public. Renato, the New York Times reports complicating the situation is whether Mr. Trump would try to invoke executive privilege, you mentioned that a minute ago, to stop him, as in Pence, or to limit Pence's testimony, a step that he has taken with limited success so far with other former officials. What's the bottom line, Renato? Could executive privilege stop Mike Pence from voluntarily or even under subpoena testifying?
Yeah, the bottom line, Katie, is it's not going to work. It's very well established in the D.C. Circuit, which is the Court of Appeals, overseeing that portion of the country, that executive privilege does not trump the need of criminal prosecutors to obtain testimony via a grand jury subpoena, as long as they can't get the information elsewhere. And as Hugo just mentioned a moment ago, no one really knows what happened in those conversations between Trump and Pence other than Mr. Pence. And so obviously there's going to be a need for that. And also, Mike Pence was present during conversations about what Jeffrey Clark and John Eastman were saying and doing, their plans and their proposals. And we know they're within the DOJ's crosshairs as well.
Renato, before I go back to Hugo, a quick question about what I mentioned anecdotally. The fact that Mike Pence has written a book and that he's actually put information within it about conversations, interactions he's had vis-a-vis January 6th, does that help the DOJ in any way to bootstrap legal arguments to be able to make sure that they can actually get Pence to testify?
I think viewers know you're a lawyer. That's a smart question, Katie. And the answer is absolutely. Because that means also there's a waiver of privilege. That's an excellent point on your part, because even to the extent there was privilege, which there wasn't here, that will be overcome by the waiver.
Hugo, as we mentioned at the beginning of this segment, Trump is clearly angry with the Supreme Court. Kind of ironic, because as we mentioned, he handpicked at least 3 of those justices. Let's take a really quick listen to all of the excuses he's given before as to why he was not going to turn over his tax returns. Take a quick listen.
I would love to give them, but I'm not going to do it while I'm under audit. You don't learn anything from a tax return. I will release my tax returns against my lawyer's wishes. When she releases her 33,000 emails, they're under audit. They have been for a long time. They're extremely complex. People wouldn't understand them.
Hugo, what are you hearing on the Hill about the timing of Treasury turning him over? We know Treasury has the returns, could be just like this. And what about the Senate Finance Committee? Can they also get Trump's records just as the Ways and Means Committee was able to get his records?
Look, we're in a real time crunch here, right? The Hill is trying to figure out if there's a window here for them to get his tax returns, analyze them, and see if there are potential legislative fixes that need to be made in the tax code, or potential criminal referrals, right? If there's anything illegal in there that they find. And so I think what they're trying to figure out is there a transmission mechanism that will enable them to get the records fast enough before the end of this Congress? I mean, it's a really limited time span, and I think this is what's really at issue. I mean, we're at Thanksgiving week this week, the House is out, Senate is out, and then we're in December, and we have really 2 weeks of potential legislative days where they can look at this, and so before we get into the next Congress. And so this is the real obstacle. And I think both the House and Senate are very attuned to this, and Trump's also attuned to this. And I think Trump world, if you talk to people around the former president, he is now trying to find a way if he can slow walk the production of his tax returns to maybe the House and the Senate, and try and ensure that the time that Congress gets this is when Republicans are in control of the House.
But the fact that Treasury has these returns, though, doesn't that end run an attempt by Trump to be able to slow walk the production?
I think so, but this is classic Trump. He's trying to find any way to delay. He's already managed to delay it for 3 years to get the tax returns of the Ways and Means Committee. And so I think whether it's with pressure on Republicans or if it's pressure on kind of Treasury officials, he is trying to find desperately, I might add, any way to make sure that these documents get there on Capitol Hill as late as possible so that he can try and pump this into a Republican House.
Renato, Mueller prosecutor Andrew Weissman wrote an op-ed giving advice to the new special counsel Jack Smith. He writes, quote, "This intense public interest suggests the importance of undervalued dimensions of the special counsel role, communication and education. His ability to explain and educate will be critical to the acceptance of the department's mission by the American public." By all accounts, it looks like special counsel Jack Smith, Renato, is moving full speed ahead. Are there any major obstacles on the immediate event horizon for him?
I actually don't think there are a lot of obstacles. The 11th Circuit yesterday cleared out what would have been an obstacle in Judge Cannon, right? That ruling obviously hamstrung the DOJ's investigation, forced them to spend a lot of time responding to her arguments to the special counsel the special master. And now I think that's going to be cleared out by the Court of Appeals. I actually think he has some clear runway ahead. And Jack Smith has some advantages that special counsel Mueller never did. If you don't forget, Mueller had to deal with obstruction during the course of his investigation. Trump was trying to fire him on multiple occasions. He had an attorney general who was hostile to him at certain points, right? Trying to hide the results of his investigation. So I think now really Jack Smith has a clear runway, and we should, I think, give him the opportunity to do what he's there to do, which is frankly to press forward and with a prosecutorial mindset and experience that the attorney general doesn't have.
It is Thursday, the 24th of November of 2022, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner, the English Bulldog, is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is Metro Shrimp and Grits Holiday Thursdays. That's right, it's a holiday, and I hope you're having a safe one, and it's not too inclement in your travels. So, how are you? Other than that, we're up here early on a holiday, and that's what we do. And so we are. And hope you enjoyed David's show earlier. We did. I got to say, somewhat of a surprise. I was almost expecting him not to do a show at all. And lo and behold, a holiday miracle. Anyway, that was great. And I have a few things to say about the right-wing media and the right-wing thought machine. Oh, God, are they vile. I was trying to find a tweet by Posobiec. I initially spelled his name wrong. I thought it was Probisiak, which is sort of like, a nose thing. But it is Posobiec. And you know, the right-wing provocateur. Anyway, I guess he was in the Navy. All right. They got their training somewhere. I just wish it was in another branch of service. I've always liked the Navy. So he had put out a tweet in which he had questioned, I guess he was going after the manlyhood of Fierro, the military vet who had taken down the murderer, the mass shooter. Why would a straight military vet be in a gay bar with his family? Because it kind of plays into this whole right-wing meme of, we're grooming people. You brought your family in there. Well, actually, his family brought him in there, but, it doesn't matter to these propagandists. I have to hold myself back. It is a holiday. We're supposed to be expressing love for the cornucopia of abundance of our material and spiritual goodwill to each other. I know. Unfortunately, we have a bunch of Nazis who don't care. They'll use our holidays against us. And they have, and they do. Anyway, it just kind of bugged me a little bit, because I guess I've just become so accustomed to it not ever being a big deal. Gay people in my life is not a big deal. Why should it be? We're all Americans. Of course, I didn't think that the idea of anybody in America being labeled a socialist or a commie anymore would be a big deal. I mean, are you kidding me? They did that back in the 50s, and look what a joke it was, and now you're doing it now? Any disagreement you have with them, you are a commie and a socialist. Of course, their argument is that any disagreement you have with us, you just call us Nazis. And I go, well, I don't know. You're the one goose-stepping, and we're the ones that have capital investments, and we're supposed to be commies. I don't know very many commies who have capital investments. Kind of goes against the idea of commieism, doesn't it? I like to affect a little bit of a cynical, angry fellow on this porch every now and then. So I just don't get it. I know that my gay friends have had to live their lives tremendously differently than I. They had to hide their marriages for so long. But I have to say, where I lived in the Bay Area, it wasn't that big of a deal. I knew so many couples who were gay, lesbian, homosexual, whatever the term is, guys and gals, raising families. Not a big deal. I might have disagreed with their choice of a particular Montessori school they took their kids to, but that's just me. And then I lost a lot of gay friends over the years because of AIDS, and it seemed like a concerted effort by the powers that be, Ronald Reagan, to maybe cull the herd. I often wondered if that was one of the reasons why. Took Rock Hudson and, Nancy getting kind of concerned about rock to finally free up some idea of doing some research and maybe stopping this scourge or slowing it. Enter Dr. Fauci. Now, if you were using homosexualism as a way to keep people from getting security clearances because it was convenient, I do remember it being argued that the reason that they had to deny social or security clearances against, that gay people couldn't get it is because they would be easily blackmailed because they wouldn't want anyone to know that they were gay. So then we get to a point in our development as a civilization, and it's not, or civilization, give me a break, a certain development in our country's psyche that it's not such a big deal, and there's a small rancid element that says, oh, yes, it is. And then you get the dad of this mass murderer. I don't know. Some people said he was drunk. He looked to me like he's been on meth and damaged very badly by it. He made clear that he's a Mormon and he's a Republican. And it's a good thing his kid isn't gay. He was afraid that his kid was gay, and his kid went in there and murdered a bunch of gay people. Oh, good. That guy is held up as some sort of model citizen. Purports to have been a gay porn actor. Could be. Which brings me to another question, just as an ancillary. There sure are a lot of maggot Nazis in the porn industry. What's up with that? That's why I don't watch porn. I can't stand watching maggot porn Nazis having sex. It just pisses me off. I don't know. It's a visceral sort of thing. I don't know why. Oh, speaking of visceral, we finally get to see Jerry Jones, the owner of the Dallas Cowboys, at a school. Actually, a quite famous picture. I don't know why it wasn't noticed before. At a school in Texas where they're going to desegregate, and the good old boys went down there to harass the black kids coming to school. And it turns out that he went to the same school. He and Janis Joplin were classmates, and he bullied the hell out of her, and no wonder she got out of Galveston, or wherever it was. Lubbock. Where did Janis Joplin come from? Texas. We'll just go the amorphous part of Texas. And hightailed it to the Bay Area. God darn, girl, you did good. Get out, get away from those. I don't know, Jerry Jones. I always hate, so I always wondered how come I had a really visceral dislike of the Cowboys, especially when Jerry Jones took over. I got to tell you, I wasn't very into them when they were America's team, way back in the 70s, just a little bit pre-Jerry Jones. But when Jerry Jones came on, my God, I just couldn't stand him. I couldn't figure out why, and now I know. He's in one of those iconic pictures from the civil rights movement where the white people were making lives absolutely miserable for everybody else. I'm not going to school with that black person. They wouldn't have said it that way. I'm just not going to get into the whole colloquialisms. So I got to say, Jerry Jones fit right into the plantation owner's psyche to run a professional football team. Yeah, I said it. Professional sports is the last bastion of where white people can, pretend they're still slavers. My slave over here is, he's got a guaranteed contract. You want to carry it? Okay, I'm just saying. All right, well, enough of that. We did take time last evening to put a curated show together for you. And why don't we go ahead and give that rundown for you as we continue here on this fine holiday Metro Grits and Shrimp and Grits Thursdays, indeed. Yeah, well, as Trump is bracing for his tax returns going to Congress, Pence is ruling his interview with the Department of Justice. A little bit different than, I'm not going to honor the subpoena from Congress. There's a separation. Yeah, well, you know what? Bill Clinton sat in front of Congress for a subpoena, so F you, Pence. Anyway, he's got a whole hell of a lot more trouble now that the Department of Justice is on the case. And I know why they don't like it. They just don't. On the rest of the menu, most of the Fed officials at their last meeting backed slower rate hikes. Wouldn't that have been nice? But, it was right before the election and they had to do something to make it seem bad for Joe. That's what it seemed like to everybody else. A South Carolina program aims to boost the ranks of black teachers, and New York's first pot crop is jeopardized by a court fight. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where the Brazil election agency rejected Bolsonaro's push to avoid votes. Say that real fast, and I didn't. And China has expanded lockdowns as COVID-19 cases hit a daily record. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com, to the right of the page, is the chat room link, and the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln, even on the holidays. Thank you, Kelly, and thank you for everything else that you do. Across from that chat room link near the bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com to the left is the link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and if maybe you could send us what you might spend on an espresso-type coffee drink once a month, it really does help us pay our bills. And we have found over these many years that when you pay your bills, you generally can fly under the radar and keep doing what you're doing. And that's what we do. And we thank you for allowing us to fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended so many, many, many years ago. Originally. If you would like to follow Netroots Radio on Twitter while we still have Twitter, you can do so at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that and a hell of a lot more. Follow me on Twitter while we still have Twitter. Follow me on Twitter at Justice Putnam. And I happen to post the show notes and links diary on Daily Co's 10 minutes before showtime, and then you can find those links on my Twitter feed while we still have Twitter. You can also follow the show on Twitter while we still have Twitter at Cookbook West and pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, etc., etc., etc. Paul Wiseman of the Associated Press brings us this first offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Holiday Thursdays. Most Federal Reserve officials at their last meeting favored reducing the size of their interest rate hikes soon, just before raising their benchmark rate by a substantial 0.75 of a point for the fourth, count 'em, 1, 2, 3, 4, for the fourth straight time. The central bank's policymakers saw very few signs that inflation pressures were abating. Still, a substantial majority of the officials felt that smaller rate hikes would likely soon be appropriate, according to the minutes of their November 1st and 2nd meeting released yesterday, Wednesday. The Fed is widely expected to raise its key short-term rate, which affects many consumer and business loans, by a half point when it meets in mid-December. Slowing the pace would give the Fed the ability to assess the economic landscape and see where they are at. Well, I thought they already did that for 4 straight times. Jennifer Lee, senior economist at BMO Capital Markets, wrote in a research report, some short of some wild inflation report before the next meeting, a 0.5 percentage point hike sounds very reasonable in December, but the Fed is clearly not finished yet. No, they're not. Rising wages, the result of a strong job market, oh, heaven forbid, combined with weak productivity growth, why is that? Were inconsistent with the Fed's ability to meet its 2% target for annual inflation, the policymakers concluded, according to the minutes. At that meeting, the Fed officials also expressed uncertainty about how long it might take for their rate hikes to slow the economy enough to tame inflation. Well, just about how long it took for the election to get over. But it's still going on, so don't forget that. Chair Jerome Powell stressed at a news conference after the meeting that the Fed wasn't even close to declaring victory in its fight to curb high inflation. No, we got to make sure that we're in deep, deep recession before we celebrate not being in inflation. Still, some of the policymakers expressed hope that falling commodity prices and the unsnarling of supply chain bottlenecks should contribute to lower inflation in the medium term. That's a nice way of saying, well, there was a lot of price gouging right around the election, and now we're not having that kind of price gouging anymore. Isn't that grand? Wednesday's minutes revealed that Fed officials thought the ongoing rate increases would be essential to keep Americans from expecting inflation to continue indefinitely. When people expect further high inflation, they act in ways that can make those expectations self-fulfilling by, for example, demanding higher wages and spending vigorously before prices can further accelerate. Like being frugal. The Fed officials noted that most employers were resisting layoffs even as the economy slowed, apparently keen to hold on to workers after a year and a half of severe labor shortages. The U.S. unemployment rate is 3.7%, just above a half-century low. This next offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy is out of the Associated Press by Devna Bose of the Post and Courier. After a student in his classroom had yet another outburst, Tyler Wright could not bear to see him written up again. Wright, then a student teacher at a Charleston elementary school, led the child out to the hallway for a chat. Within minutes, the student started crying. He was telling me that he really doesn't get to see his dad and stuff like that, Wright said, that his dad was supposed to come see him but never did. At the end of the day, that was the root cause for the outburst, because the child was angry. Wright told him that he grew up in a similar situation, but he still paid attention the best he could, despite what was going on at home. The conversation was all it took, Wright said, for the student to open up and improve his behavior. Wright became a full-time teacher at Stono Park Elementary in January, thanks to a program in Charleston aimed at making the teaching profession more accessible to black men, who are vastly underrepresented in classrooms in South Carolina and around the United States. Just 7% of America's public school teachers were black during the 2017-18 school year, although black students make up 15% of the student population. Their absence in classrooms is deeply felt, especially in states like South Carolina, where almost a fifth of the students are black, and black males account for less than 3% of teachers. Having teachers who reflect the identity of their students can foster connections between teachers and students and help avoid the kind of misinterpretation of behavior that can contribute to the disparities in discipline for black students, experts say. Researchers show that black teachers can lead to improved academic performance and higher graduation rates for black students. I can see why they would not want anything like that to happen. And when I say they, you know who I mean. At a time of teacher shortages in South Carolina and around the country, the presence of black teachers also can make it more likely for black students to pursue careers in education themselves. The issue starts fairly young, said Eric Duncan, a member of the policy team at the Education Trust, a nonprofit advocacy organization. They get the negative impression of school because they are traditionally overdisciplined or misidentified in terms of behavior challenges, when they may have some other issues or challenges that should be addressed in a more culturally proficient way. There are other barriers to teaching for black men. Many come from low-income families and face pressure to find higher-paying jobs, and there are license requirements that were deliberately created to prevent people of color from becoming teachers, Duncan said. The program in Charleston, Men of CHS Teach, is a partnership between the University of South Carolina and the Charleston County School District. It places new teachers in elementary school classrooms, even if they have not participated in a student-teacher program, and creates an alternative pathway for them to get teaching licenses. CCSD decided to focus on recruiting elementary teachers because it's typically difficult to fulfill those positions with men, and research shows that if black students have a teacher of color in elementary school, they're less likely to drop out of high school and more likely to consider college. For black boys of low-income backgrounds, those effects are even greater. Maysoon Khan of the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro's Shrimp and Grits Holiday Thursdays. A court fight that has prevented New York from awarding marijuana dispensary licenses in some parts of the state could wind up hurting small farms that just harvested their first cannabis crop, officials warned a judge on Tuesday. New York on Monday issued its first 36 licenses for dispensaries, which will become the only places in the state where recreational marijuana is sold legally. The state, though, has had to delay plans to authorize scores of more dispensaries because of a legal battle over its licensing criteria. U.S. District Court Judge Gary Sharp in Albany blocked the state from issuing licenses in Brooklyn and swaths of upstate New York after a company owned by a Michigan resident challenged a requirement that applicants demonstrate a significant presence in New York State. In a court filing on Tuesday, the state asked the judge to loosen that injunction to prevent jeopardizing a marijuana harvest of an estimated $1.5 billion now waiting to be distributed to retailers. If the farmers who were already issued cultivating licenses have nowhere to sell their crop, they will lose the millions of dollars that have been collectively invested in their businesses. Some may lose their businesses, and they will otherwise be forced into the predicament of either watching their crops rot and expire or selling them on the illicit market. Assistant Attorney General Amanda Kurlik wrote. The court filing, made on behalf of the state's Office of Cannabis Management, suggested that the company challenging exclusion from the applicant pool would most likely only be considered for a dispensary in the Finger Lakes region in the state's center. Blocking the state from approving licenses in 4 other regions, including central and western New York, the Mid-Hudson, and Brooklyn, would cause significantly more harm than necessary, the state argued. It was unclear when Sharp might rule on the request. Well, don't let it go to waste. Okay, let us now go to our break. And when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we've curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Scientific American's 60 Second Science. I'm Shannon Berman.
And I'm Sarah Goodwin.
You're listening to the sound of a redwood forest after a wildfire. It's eerily quiet, save for the sound of our own footsteps.
We recorded those sounds in the spring of 2021. That was 9 months after a devastating fire swept through California's Big Basin Redwood State Park.
The flames left the redwood trees charred, but still mostly alive. The rest of the life that usually animates the forest was gone. You can hear it in the silence. There's always been a fire season in California in the late summer and fall, but recently it's gotten longer and worse, much worse. There's no denying climate change here. 2022 has been another year of drought for the American West. And that means that until the winter rains come in force, there's still a risk for fire.
California forests burned frequently until about 100 years ago, when across the West, a new approach to fire emerged in the name of conservation: suppression, as in fire was bad, a destructive force to be avoided at all costs. But research into thousands of years of climate history has shown that fire has always been a part of this landscape. We see it in the tree rings of the ancient redwoods. Fire keeps these forests healthy and vibrant. The native peoples who lived in these forests before colonization seem to understand this intuitively.
From an indigenous cultural perspective, we think about the frequencies of fire and the stewardship of those landscapes.
Don Hankins is a scientist who studies the intersection of fire, nature, and people. He's also a member of the Plains Miwok tribe.
The history of the removal of fire from California's, at least coastal landscapes, began pretty early on with early Spanish settlement. When we think about some of the first policies within the state that limited the extent of where indigenous people could engage with fire, that policy initially came out around 1793 from a proclamation from the Spanish governor of California that forbid indigenous people from using fire. And so, that spread from Mission Santa Barbara outward.
Hankins has done research into the indigenous practices before Europeans settled in the area.
Ohlone peoples in this region would have been living in this landscape and using these different resources from the different ecosystems that are there, from the wetlands to the grasslands to the different oak forests and conifer forests and so forth. They each have their own time frames for when fire would be appropriate.
And Hankins says they would take a hand in the process of ecosystem management when the timing seemed right.
So some places would burn relatively frequently. People would see that, the health of the grass is declining, we need to burn, or we're getting too much litter accumulation on the forest floor. With this policy in place, people were limited in being able to burn because there were really strict penalties applied to people who set fires.
But now we are seeing the folly of fire suppression in Big Basin and elsewhere. I talked to Portia Halbert, the chief environmental scientist for Big Basin State Park. She was there when the fire took off. It's crazy how fast the fire came in. What was the burn of Big Basin like? What was the fire like that came through?
The day the fire started was unseasonably warm. I think it was probably in the, low 90s. And it was sunny and it was hot. This part of California, coastal Central and Northern California, we have foggy, cool summers. When I go to the beach, I don't wear my swimsuit. I often wear a wool sweater.
So that set the stage for a big fire. How did it actually begin?
So we had lightning strikes. I think there was something like 11,000 of them that quickly started fires everywhere around the mountains. You could see these massive smoke columns. We had a wind pickup out of the northwest, and it took the 3 fires that were burning all around Big Basin. And it just pushed. It just pushed the fire right through the park.
How did it all end?
We weren't able to contain the fires with our current suppression resources in the state. What saved us is that we had the fog move in 6 days into the fire. Our normal weather pattern was back. So that marine influence that brings cool, moist air from the ocean is now keeping the fire relatively mild.
I thought that Big Basin would never burn.
That's Christian Schwarz. After the Big Basin wildfire, he spent a lot of time crawling around with his face inches from the scorched earth. That's because he's a mycologist. On the forest floor, the mushrooms he studies also had a story to tell.
My first visits back to Big Basin after the fire, a very small number of species of mushroom were present, but the ones that were present in amazing volume. And that's because they are fire-adapted species in some way. Species that not only were able to tolerate the burning, but were in fact stimulated by it.
It's all a part of the recovery process, but what eventually emerges at Big Basin in the centuries ahead is unknowable at this point.
Literally 95% of the park burning left me realizing that there is no climate outcome that is impossible to imagine. The thing that I thought least likely and most painful happened. And climate change is here. It's a past tense verb. Climate changed.
The reporting for this podcast came from work that Sarah and I did as part of the Science Communication Lab. We are a nonprofit organization committed to science storytelling and filmmaking.
The interviews used were gathered as part of a short documentary film called Fire Among Giants, which you can see at scientificamerican.com.
We want to thank Don, Portia, and Christian for giving their time to this project. And we want to thank you all for listening.
For Scientific American's 60-Second Science, I'm Sarah Goodwin.
And I'm Shannon Berman.
I'm probably okay to have one more drink before I drive home. I'm probably okay. I open the window to stay alert. Probably okay. I just popped some gum in my mouth.
Step out of the car, please.
I probably made a mistake.
Probably okay isn't okay when it comes to drinking and driving. If you see a warning sign, stop and call a cab, a car, or a friend. Buzzed driving is drunk driving. A message brought to you by NHTSA and the Ad Council.
Don't you wish your life came with a warning app?
Stop. That dog does not want to be petted.
A heads up before something bad happens.
You should not send that text.
Uh-oh. Life doesn't always give you time to change the outcome, but prediabetes does. With early diagnosis and a few healthy changes, you can reverse prediabetes and prevent or delay type 2 diabetes. To learn your risk, take the 1-minute test today at doihaveprediabetes.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and its prediabetes awareness partners.
He seems sorry.
We very clearly told him not to look up there.
I'm honestly impressed that he was able to do it.
Right? What, did he balance on that big chair?
Yeah, I mean, I guess he'll just know what his gifts are this year.
I really thought we had hidden them well.
If they can find their presents, they can find a gun.
911, what is your emergency?
Every day, 8 kids and teens are unintentionally killed or injured by loaded and unlocked guns. Learn how to make your home safer at endfamilyfire.org. Brought to you by the Ad Council and End Family Fire.
Hi, it's Tom. Could we humbly suggest your donation to netrootsradio.com? All we've got to run this 24-hour powerhouse of progressive resistance radio is what comes out of our own wallets. And you are our biggest donor. And it doesn't take much, $3, $5. Just go to the bottom of our netrootsradio.com page and hit our secure donate button. Heck, you can even make a recurring contribution. So donate what you'd like at the bottom of our netrootsradio.com's homepage. Because you are our biggest donor. netrootsradio.com. Together, we are Resistance Radio.
Breaking news. After years of failed Republican efforts to uncover any proof of widespread voter fraud by Democrats, Republican Governor Ron DeSantis of Florida has found not one but 20 ineligible people casting ballots. Like Donald Trump and a gaggle of other GOP governors, DeSantis has used the phony bugaboo of an illegal voting epidemic as a political ploy to keep the true believers believing. They spend millions of taxpayer dollars on partisan wild goose chases, and DeSantis even created a new police bureaucracy, the Office of Election Crimes, to snoop on voters. It was all just silly political nastiness, but then, Ron's dragnet scooped up 20 of the diabolical culprits. Vindication. Who were they? All are former convicts who had previously been stripped of their right to vote, but each one unwittingly cast ballots in 2020, wrongly believing that their rights had been restored after serving their time. Who cares what they thought, bellowed the bullish governor. He trashed them as election criminals, ignoring their constitutional right to be presumed innocent unless convicted by a jury. Well, gosh, why did all 20 think they could vote? Because each one had properly submitted voter registration applications that went to DeSantis' state agency responsible for determining eligibility. But oops, Ron's own administration boo-booed, erroneously authorizing all 20 to get official voter ID cards. In short, the governor himself had effectively told them they could vote. Then he had them arrested and publicly condemned for doing so. This is Jim Hightower saying, now running for president, DeSantis says God has chosen him to rule because he's a fighter. But hello, he fights people rather than for them. He's a bully, and there's nothing godly about that. Nothing presidential either.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1947. That was the day that the U.S. House of Representatives found 10 Hollywood writers and directors in contempt for alleged ties to communism. The decision was based on the House Un-American Activity Committee's finding the 10 to be in contempt the week before. More than 40 screenwriters, directors, and producers were brought before the committee to testify about the allegations of rampant communist activities in the movie-making industry. During the Cold War, fear of communism reached a fevered pitch. This included the fear that communists were infiltrating Hollywood to spread their message to the public through the movies. 10 refused to answer the committee's questions or to name names of other potential communists. Each of the 10 was fined $1,000, sentenced to a year in prison, and blacklisted from working in Hollywood. Perhaps the most well-known of the 10 was one of Hollywood's leading screenwriters, Dalton Trumbo. He served 11 months in federal prison for refusing to cooperate. While he was blacklisted, he wrote the screenplay for Roman Holiday, the romantic film starring Gregory Peck and Audrey Hepburn. Since Trumbo could not take credit for the film, another screenwriter friend put his name on it. Roman Holiday won the 1953 Academy Award for Best Screenplay. 3 years later, another Trumbo script, The Brave One, also received the Academy Award. Finally, in 1960, Trumbo worked on Stanley Kubrick's acclaimed film Spartacus. Kubrick refused to remove Trumbo from the credits, busting the blacklist. In 2015, actor Bryan Cranston starred in a film about Trumbo's life. During the House Un-American Activities Committee hearings, the Screen Actors Guild passed a resolution that members had to disavow any ties to the Communist Party. They also elected actor Ronald Reagan president of their union. Like what you hear? Check out more at laborhistoryin2.com.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Holiday Thursdays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 35 degrees Fahrenheit, expecting a high in the low to mid-60s. What the hell? Currently, we are in a dense fog advisory, and it was good that they advised us because there is dense fog right outside the mothership as we speak. And of course, today's temperature will be much warmer than what we had yesterday. And after the fog lifts, we'll have some clouds this morning, and we'll give way to generally sunny skies for the afternoon. Winds light and variable, partly cloudy early this evening with increasing clouds overnight. Lows in the mid-30s, winds light and variable, and then cloudy tomorrow with highs in the mid to upper 50s, winds light and variable, and it looks like later on in the day we may have a little bit of precipitation, about 1/10 to 1/15 of an inch, and then a respite on Saturday with quite sunny skies, and then it looks like we're going to begin a snowy mix of rain and snow for the rest of the week beginning on Sunday. We'll see how that goes, though. Pollen is rated as none right outside the window here at the mothership in Rogue River. The air quality index for the Rogue River Valley region is in the good range at 21 parts per million, and that daytime UV index is low at level 1. Yes, I'll get it out. Barometric pressure is still holding steady, but this time at 30.34 inches. Visibility is less than a half mile, and relative humidity is at 90%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. London is 55 degrees with heavy rain. Paris is 53 and cloudy. Rome is 60 degrees and fair. Kyiv is 36 and cloudy. Kabul is 42 degrees and clear. Hong Kong is 71 and partly cloudy. Tokyo is 58 degrees with rain showers. Sydney, Australia is 65 and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 55 degrees and sunny. And New York is 50 degrees Fahrenheit and sunny. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world. David Biller of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. The head of Brazil's electoral authority rejected the request from Bolsonaro and his political party to annul ballots cast on most electronic voting machines, which would have overturned the October 30 election. Alexandre de Moraes had issued a prior ruling that implicitly raised the possibility that Bolsonaro's party could suffer from such a challenge. He conditioned analysis of the request on the presentation of an amended report that included results from the first electoral round on October 2, in which the party won more seats in both congressional houses than any other, and he established a 24-hour deadline. Early yesterday, Wednesday, party president Vladimir Costa and lawyer Marcela de Bessa held a press conference and said there would be no amended report. The complete bad faith of the plaintiff's bizarre and illicit request was proven both by the refusal to add to the initial petition and the total absence of any evidence of irregularities and the existence of a totally fraudulent narrative of the facts, de Moraes wrote in his decision hours later. He also ordered the suspension of government funds for Bolsonaro's party's coalition until a fine of $4.3 million U.S. for bad faith litigation is paid.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Holiday staff pressed into service at the Associated Press bring us this final amuse-bouche here at the chef's table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, Metro Shrimp and Grits Holiday Thursdays. Pandemic lockdowns are expanding across China, including in a city where factory workers clashed this week with police as the number of COVID-19 cases hits a daily record. Residents of 8 districts of Zhengzhou, home to 6.6 million people, were told to stay home for 5 days beginning today, except to buy food or get medical treatment. Daily mass testing was ordered in what the city government called a war of annihilation against the virus. During the clashes on Tuesday and Wednesday yesterday, Zhengzhou police beat workers protesting over a pay dispute at the biggest factory for Apple's iPhone, located in an industrial zone near the city. Foxconn, the Taiwan-based owner of the factory, apologized for what it called an input error in the computer system and said it would guarantee that the pay is the same as agreed to and in official recruitment posters. The daily caseload has been steadily increasing. This week, authorities reported China's first COVID-19 deaths in 6 months, bringing the total to 5,232. While the number of cases and deaths is relatively low compared to the U.S. and other countries, China's ruling Communist Party remains committed to a zero COVID strategy that aims to isolate every case and eliminate the virus entirely. Most other governments have ended antivirus controls and now rely on vaccinations and immunity from past infections to help prevent deaths and serious illness. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we will have regular and holiday programming throughout the day. And we will also meet up tomorrow for Blue Moon Spirits Fridays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we will meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs, sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre comme au long de golfe clair, t'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma robe à fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum, 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 dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver, dans mon jardin d'hiver.